Good afternoon. Good morning to some of us here on the call. It's day 16 of the I'm Curious to Know project presented by Inner Voice. I'm very glad to bring Stef Hanson to the show today. I owe her a lifetime of debt here because it is 5:30 in the morning in Australia. And so you've seen into the future. Tell us all about what the future's like.
Everything's back to normal. People are hugging and kissing strangers, and it's a beautiful place.
I don't know what your normal was before when you're kissing strangers, but I'll take
it. Don't tell my husband.
Yeah. If you're watching, then we'll go back to bed. So, Stef, you and I, we're both from Australia. We had yet to meet in person. We've had a conversation over the phone. I've been a big fan of your work for a while now, and I'm really interested to hear, firstly, the name. Where did the name come from, WITSUP? And then secondly, what was the impetus behind you starting WITSUP? And give us a little bit of context around the platform that you have as well.
So just to start off, your lifetime of debt can be paid in coffee. That helps a lot. So just keep that in mind for when we actually catch up in person. WITSUP, where do I even start? I'll get to the name later because it won't make sense until I tell the story, I don't think. But essentially, like anyone else who's involved in triathlon and probably endurance sport, once you get involved in it, you tend to fall head over heels in love. And that was me, stereotype, did one triathlon, thought I was going to go pro. I just absolutely loved everything about it. And the more I sort of got involved, the more things I started to do. So I was a personal trainer at the time. So I wanted to learn how to be a coach. This is over a few years. So I wanted to join those sort of two passions together. Then I started commentating at our local triathlon series and learned very quickly that people don't like speaking on a microphone because, I thought I'd have a list of people I'd have to stand behind to get the job, but they pretty much just handed the microphone to me on the spot. And then I started writing for a magazine, and it started off as personal training articles, and that developed into race reports and interviews. And I started interviewing these incredible athletes, most of who I was interviewing were women. And I remember interviewing Caroline Steffen, who's, one of the best athletes at the sports scene and who I just always found a really interesting character because she was this really stoic, her nickname's Xena, warrior princess. I mean, if that doesn't sum up the kind of athlete she came across as, I don't know what would. But just talking to her and finding out more about her, I was like, wow, this person's incredible and I love her story. And anyway, I noticed that when I did that article, she didn't feature on the cover of the magazine. And I was quite blown away just because she was the feature article. She was the main event. And I just couldn't understand why she wasn't on the cover. So I just innocently asked the editor why she wasn't. And his response was, women don't sell magazines. And it was really interesting because it wasn't a loaded question. It was just such an innocent question. And I mean, you've got kids. Mm-hmm. I've got one kid who's not actually talking really yet, but I've hung out with a lot of kids and I love their curiosity and their innocence. And that's how I felt that question came across as a kid. Like, I actually just don't understand. That doesn't seem like a good enough answer to me. And pretty quickly I realised that I wasn't going to change his mind. He was pretty set in stone. And I remember going to a barbecue at my friend's house a couple of days later and I said, what do you think about this idea? And the platform WITSUP, which is all about giving a platform to women in triathlon, the idea was born and I pitched the ideas to my mates. They're like, that's what you've been working on for the past 5 years. Without knowing it, that's what you were meant to do. So I just learned how to do it and did it.
Yeah. Well, you've done an amazing job. I think that it's safe to say that you provide the best women's triathlon coverage in the world. I don't know a platform or an outlet that does it as well as you. So kudos
Thank
to you
you.
for that. What was your immediate reaction when he said that to you? Did you have to kind of take a moment to reconcile that thought, or were you able to have that conversation with him there on the spot? What was that, next little phase like once he told you that?
I definitely I took a step back. I think because I wasn't going into the discussion with any preconceived notions. It was just such an innocent, off the hand question that I think that's why I was just so blown away. I was flabbergasted. And then I think that just opened my eyes up to a lot of things that I just didn't really know existed. It's weird because people who I grew up with always think it's quite amusing that I, host a platform for women in sport and I'm all about, equality. Just because I never really felt like I was unequal when I was, growing up. I grew up with two brothers. I played sport with all the boys. All of my friends, my close friends were guys. So I never, ever felt like that. But once WITSUP started to grow, I just realized that I wanted people to feel like I did, because I never felt like, boys or men were my superior, or I couldn't run as fast as the boy next to me, or I couldn't play cricket with the boys at lunch. I just never felt like that. Yeah. And that's when I realized that existed out there. And it took a long time to realize. But I just kind of figured that it's important for everyone else to feel like I do. And I really recognize that not everyone does.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought, because I feel like growing up in Australia, it was the same. I had an older sister, and we did everything as a family, and it didn't feel like as a kid there was that inequality, but perhaps it becomes more prevalent as we get older, and as we get to, and I think about, my last real adult job was at Lululemon, and we produced a half marathon that had 80% women in the race, 20%. So there's these examples where that inequality doesn't exist. But to your point, perhaps as we get to the elite end of the sport, thinking about triathlon, there's not equal numbers that go and compete in Kona. They don't get the magazine covers because they don't sell magazines. The coverage of Ironman events and other events is very heavily weighted to males. So perhaps it is, for some reason we grow into this inequality when it shouldn't. It doesn't exist when you're a kid, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's still important to be educating kids, because it's culture. So, and that's sort of, when kids are growing up, they're growing up as part of that culture. So it's important to be educating them as well as adults, I guess. The older I get, the more I do realize that there are those inequalities. And even in the space that I work in, some days I've had messages from people when they've seen me, say, at a finishing line of an event, and they're like, you're pretty much the only female, taking photos, or, and I can hold my own. But I think that's because I did grow up with two brothers, and I worked at a bar when I was 18, and I can hold my own. But, not everyone should have to feel like they have to hold their own, or, they have to just feel like they belong. And yeah.
Well, I think that's the hardest part. I think you're perfectly suited and perfectly made to be doing this because of your upbringing. But, have you experienced along the way, someone stepping in front of you when you're trying to get the shot, or, why are you here? Like those kind of glares that you get. Tell me about some of those that maybe you've kind of had to overcome since starting WITSUP.
I think, one of it's just a really boring one. It was someone at the end of a finishing line. So what happens is because everyone goes to the finishing line for the men, because over the iron distance they finish roughly an hour before the women. And my biggest thing is, well, every single media outlet is at the finishing line and no one's covering the last hour of the race, which is arguably, one of the most exciting parts of the race. That's when we see the most changes. Everyone, starting to do the death march in the marathon. So, things are starting to happen. But if every media outlet is at the finishing line, no one knows what's going on with the women. So I just do not go to the men's finish. I don't cover the men. There's no need for me to be there. But it means that while I'm running around still getting those last sort of 45 minutes worth of the women's race, and I get to the finishing line, where do I go? Because everyone's just there waiting. And, there was a time when someone had saved their spot, but I'd come in, had asked around, because I don't I'm not a bully or anything. And they said, oh, we don't know where they've gone. They've been gone for 30 minutes. So I was like, well, clearly they're not here. And he came back and he just abused me for being in his spot. And I was like, mate, I'm here for the women. Why don't we see if we can work something out? Instead of just coming in and being aggressive, let's just, and the old me, and I mean maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, would have just moved. And I was like, no, you don't deserve to be here any more than what I do. But I think, so that's just a boring whatever. Yeah. But the one I've noticed in the last couple of years is, I think when you're, I'm vocal about things that I'm passionate about. Other things I'm not great at confrontation. I don't like it. I struggle with people not liking me. So if I've caused any upset, there's that pang in my heart that, that I may have upset somebody. But if it's something that I'm truly passionate about, then I'm a bull at a gate and you won't stop me. But I feel like sometimes you kind of get this reputation, oh, Steph, runs a women's website, so she's going to be complaining about this and complaining about that. And so when I ask just some basic questions, or I pull people up, this is a lot of behind the scenes stuff. Someone said to me once, just go back outside and enjoy the sunshine. This is on race day. And I'm like, I'm asking you just a legit question and you clearly have a problem with me. Let's talk it out. And this is going on for 10, 20 minutes. And I just said to him, would you say that to one of the other guys? Would you say that to one of the guys who came in here and asked you a question? Or what do you mean? And I just kept prodding him and he's like, just go outside and enjoy the sunshine, And I'm like, you condescending. So it's things like that I notice that really, they really get under my skin. I actually let them affect me way too much because, I don't know. That kind of stuff really frustrates me. And like I said before, it's a cultural thing that needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a hard road as it is without having to deal with that stuff. So I applaud you for standing your ground. And I think that what you're doing is important and what you're doing is necessary. And I don't think we ever got to the story of where the name came from. So maybe.
Yeah. I laugh because it's a bit embarrassing. But because, back when I launched, I was like, I'll just call it WIT.com, Women in Triathlon, not knowing that any 3-letter website is taken. I didn't know that people buy domains and then try and sell it back to people, Yeah. I didn't know that existed. So the name I found probably the hardest of this entire thing. I was going through Greek goddess names and, just trying to come up with this. And I really battled. And then somehow WITSUP popped into my head and it's Women in Triathlon sup, as in what's going on? Because it's so dumb. But it sums me up really well. I'm really serious about what I do, but I don't take myself too seriously. And I think that's what I just keep coming back to with that name. But then I was also like, well, where did Nike come from? That's just a random name. I can have a random name. So I justified it.
So you're on the level of Nike with your randomness of names. I think there was a story behind Nike's name, though. I think it was
It is a
God or something.
Yes, for victory. It is.
There you go.
Yep.
Well, WITSUP works. I love it. It's catchy. People recognize it. It's totally your personality. So it does suit you. And, we had a quick comment here from the audience. Barbara, I love how you got to the name. It does suit you.
Thanks, Barbara.
It's an upvote from Barbara. Talking about the first. So you actually told me a really interesting story about how you launched, and you come to share the idea with your friends. They're all behind it. They're all for it. They're pushing you in that direction. And then Ironman Melbourne comes around, and you're ready to launch. Tell me that story of the launch party and how you got going.
So I always had this thing. We actually ran a focus group at the same place that we launched as well, in my friend's lounge room. She's got a big lounge room. And I learned a lot from it. One of my friends ran it, thank God, because I would not have done the focus group justice. She just knew the right questions to ask. And anyway, from the end of all that, I realized that this platform was going to be a lot more than just giving professional women a platform. It was a lot about breaking down barriers, getting more women involved in not only the sport, but the lifestyle that we love. So learned a lot about that. And that's when I realized that WITSUP had to be more than just an online community. I really wanted to have that real life element so that when people are at races, they would come up and say hi and feel comfortable talking to me, and then meeting other people. And I just really thought that was important, particularly for women. So when we launched, the woman, her name is Sarah DeWolf, and she's amazing. And I've hosted so many things, including my child's first birthday at her house. Yeah, pretty much. It was 2 days. So Ironman Melbourne's on the Sunday, then you've got the after party on the Monday, and then Tuesday we launched. And I invited, there was about 100 people that my husband catered for by himself. He's a chef, so he has some experience. And just it was like a big bunch of my friends within the sport, out of the sport, but then also, some of the movers and shakers within the sport as well, including some of the athletes who are at Ironman Melbourne. We made it this big party, and even had a countdown to hit go. We launched our ambassador program, which was just all about showcasing an age group triathlete and giving them this incredible 12-month opportunity with some of the brands who I have been working with for years, including Giant, and Live now is like the sister company to Giant. That was worth about $18,000 or something, with the thought process of they could be a great ambassador to get more women involved. Yeah. But I think the highlight of that was I had said to Caroline Steffen, and I'd known her through doing a few interviews with her, but I didn't know her really well. And I just said, oh, look, we're launching this platform. If there's any chance, she had just smashed the Ironman Melbourne race. I think at that time she ended up with like the third fastest Ironman time ever, behind Chrissy Wellington twice. Right. So, she was top of the world. And I said, oh, look, if you can, it'd be amazing. Totally get it. Short notice. And she's like, oh, I've got a photo shoot, but I'll let you know. And then she just rocked up, and I was just, I don't know, it was just a big moment for me in that I felt really legit, because I wasn't super close with her, but she respected me enough to make an appearance. And then I was like, oh, can you come up on stage and I'll ask you a few questions? The stage was just in front of the fireplace. Yeah. And she got up, but when she got up to come and have a chat, everyone made this arch, and she sort of ran under it, and everyone was cheering. And I was just like, oh my God, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it was the coolest night ever. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, very cool. What a serendipitous moment too, I think, having Caroline there on that launch after the story you told around how she didn't make the cover. I think it's kind of symmetry around that. Let me ask this, it's really hard in triathlon. It's a tight-knit community, amateurs, elites alike. And when you're providing coverage, you're covering races, you're sharing stories, you're telling stories. How do you kind of reconcile being friends with the athletes and wanting them to do well and cheering them on with telling the stories that need to be told within the sport?
Oh, this is such a hard question because I ask myself all the time. And I think I keep changing as well. Not changing, but I guess moving the goalposts a little bit. But I guess my underlying thing is we're not about sensationalism. We're not about that. I'm all about, like I said from the start, providing a platform for these incredible women. And over time, that takes building up a lot of trust with them, which I think is why I can get stories out of them, because they do. Not that sounds like I'm trying to get stories out of them all the time, but a lot of the stories that come out are through just one-on-one chats where they do feel completely comfortable to tell me, the inner workings of behind the scenes and stuff, which could potentially turn into a story, but it could not as well. But they trust me enough to tell me those stories, knowing that I'm not going to use them to, get a few more likes on our Facebook page or whatever. In saying that, it's really hard because sometimes there are stories out there that need to kind of be told, but could potentially be a little bit detrimental. And I think it's a case by case. But I guess I just keep going back to why I started this. And again, it was to give it a platform, but also it's mine. I can do whatever I want with it. I don't have to be like a traditional newspaper. I don't have to. I can do whatever I want with it. And I choose to look at it more as a way that I'm helping. So the amount of times I've said, I'm not here to throw you under the bus to people, because they, those who I don't know as well, struggle to open up a little bit. And I get it, totally understand it. And over time, I know they will. But also the amount of times I've said to athletes, look, we're doing a live interview, maybe you need to be wearing your sponsors gear, or, so I see it as a way that I can help educate, just not because I'm an expert, but because I've learnt so much from so many different facets of the sport. And that could be, even an up and coming pro. I can, help sort of guide them throughout the media landscape, or, so that's the way I look at it. I hate it when people say, though, who's my favorite athlete, because there's the favorite athlete, there's the favorite I don't have favorites. I have favorites, plural. I don't have a favorite. But yeah, it's hard because I have become so close with some of these women.
Yeah, it's hard not to. And when you're the way you describe those conversations and those meetings and those, deep sharing with each other, it becomes difficult not to become invested in them and their story and cheering them along. And I think I like the way you put it. Like, we don't necessarily have a journalistic responsibility to find the truth. We're not telling stories about politicians. We're not telling story about corruption within big corporations. So we don't have to abide by these journalistic rules. We can tell the stories that are interesting to us, that we feel are relevant to the communities that we serve, being you and I in our own niches. What has been that most impactful story you feel like you've shared, whether it's, a story that needed to be told, whether you saw a breakthrough or breakout for an athlete that you helped along the way? What's been that most impactful story or moment that you've been able to share?
I mean, the one that comes to mind, and it's probably because I've spoken about it a little bit in this past week, because we just released a mini podcast series with Helen Murray from the Inside Try Show, which was about the healthy body, which takes a look at eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image. So I guess that's just at the forefront of my mind, and maybe I'll have a bit more of a think about some other stories and I'll butt in later. But this particular one was with Jodie Cunnama. She was Jodie Swallow at the time. And we were it was Dubai or Bahrain. I can't remember which one, But I'd reached out and I'd said, oh, I'm doing these little series, and this is before I knew anything about camera equipment, and I think I recorded it on my iPhone. I can't even remember. Like, the audio was terrible, but we sat on this couch and we had a chat, and it just quickly came up about her body image issues and disordered eating issues throughout her career. And I just sat there, not so much flabbergasted by the story, but flabbergasted that she trusted me with her story. And that, I think that was really the point where I knew that that's what I could do with athletes, was that they could be vulnerable with me, that they could trust me with their stories. And so, yeah, that was a big turning point for me.
Yeah. What was that recognition in yourself? For me, I can imagine myself sitting in your seat, and I've been in many instances where someone's sharing something with me. My thought is, okay, I have a responsibility here, and I become hyper aware of everything around me, and I'm listening, and I'm intently focused, and I'm trying to gather everything, and I'm trying to stay curious and be in the conversation. What's that like internal reaction that you get, or the feelings that you get when you're in that moment? You're like, okay, this is something that I really need to be paying attention to here.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's almost like they're on speaker in your mind, and there's all these other things going on, but it's all a bit blurred and muffled because you're just honing in. But then I start to think, where's my next question? Actually, I don't think about when, my next question. I get to the point where I'm about to ask a question and then think, back then I would think, oh, am I going too far? Should I be asking this? But now, because that was, 6-7 years ago, I don't have that so much anymore, because I've got more confidence in myself and in the relationship with the athlete, that I can ask those questions and they feel comfortable talking to me about it. And the most recent one I can tell you about is a chat with Jodie Stimson, who unfortunately her dad passed away at the start of this year, and she posts a lot about her dad, over the years, and she posted a lot since he passed away. So it was clearly, it was horrible for anyone, obviously, who loses their dad, but their relationship was very obvious that they were tight.
Yeah.
And we were doing I'd reached out to her before her dad had passed away. We were going to do a podcast, and it just never came about timing wise. And then I just didn't want to reach out to her again, but eventually she contacted us, and I was feeling a bit, part of our podcast is finding out who you are, who the people are in your life. And I knew it was going to come up. And I guess I talked to her as a friend, and it just came out naturally, and she was happy to discuss it with me. There were tears, but she was comfortable with that. Yeah. So while I knew that it was going to get a bit hard and emotional, I felt quite confident that we could portray that story, and that she would feel completely comfortable at ease with me in telling probably one of the toughest stories that she has to tell. But we spoke about it afterwards, and she said it was cathartic, and she felt really good, and we laughed at the end, and she felt like it was a really good opportunity to tell everyone who her dad was. So to me, that was just such a, I don't know. I felt really good about it. I felt drained after that conversation, but I felt so good about it because I think we did it well, I think.
Well, I think what an extraordinary ability to be able to have people feel comfortable. And without you and without the platform, these stories aren't available to us to hear and to listen to and to read and look at. And perhaps the athletes themselves don't, cathartic and therapeutic you described. So, the ability for you to be that person for those people, I think is incredible. So hats off to you for that as well.
Thanks.
You talked about draining. I want to ask you this because, sitting on the other side of the microphone is both sides really isn't always the easiest thing. I feel an energetic responsibility every time I show up. Anytime I'm on any type of, myself interviewing or an interviewee. Tell me about that, like your energetic responsibility to take a deep breath before it starts and be present and be curious, and then you walk away and you just absolutely pooped after 40 minutes. So tell me about that. Like, do you have that same experience?
Definitely. Yep. I think years ago, though, I would never have recognized it because I would ignore those feelings to the point that a few years ago, I actually got quite sick. I ended up with adrenal fatigue and chronic fatigue. And I think a lot of that was because I am this energizer bunny that just goes at 100 miles an hour all day, every day. And it finally caught up with me. So now I'm past that. I recognize those roller coasters a lot better. Yeah, it's interesting. I still struggle though, because I can't be up all the time, especially with a kid now as well. Like you just can't be, firing on all cylinders the whole time. But I still have this thing where I'm like, yeah, but that's how people know me. That's what that's the persona I have to give. So I battle with those sort of thoughts every now and then. But in saying that, once I'm talking to someone about what we love, it just kicks in naturally, I think. But I certainly feel it afterwards that I'm done, I'm cooked, and I can't talk to anyone more. And
I don't want to think. I don't want to do anything.
Oh my God. I was just saying the other day, I couldn't figure out what to have for lunch because I'd had, a podcast session that morning, and I was like, I can't make any more decisions. I'm done. Yeah, I just make lunch. Brett, feed me.
You're a chef, make lunch. So I'm glad you recognize that. Tell me about what you've done to maybe refill your cup. So you've had these fatigue issues. You've recognized in yourself that after a podcast session or an interview, you need to have some downtime. You've got a kid. Like, how do you find time to refill Stef's cup?
I'm not very good at it. I'm still learning. Particularly at the moment, I'm finding it really hard, to be completely honest with you, because I just can't help but think, I need to take advantage of the time that we've got when we're stuck in. So Brett's at home full time at the moment, so he can have Frankie while I can work. So I need to make the most of it, and I need to do this. And because in 2 weeks he might be going back to work, and I won't have that time available anymore. And so that's the old Stef creeping back in again. And I recognize that, but I haven't been great at taking actions to fill up my own cup, to be honest with you. And it's I don't know, it's a constant learning process, isn't it? I think it's a big step that I can recognize it. So I don't know, I'm trying to do the basic things, like make sure I exercise, because, years ago, that would be my priority. And at the moment, it just isn't. But I know how important it is for my mental and physical health. But I struggle with the motivation to get outdoors, which is not who I've been. I'm 39, and for 37 years of my life, you couldn't stop me from running out the door to play sport or to exercise. But now I'm different. And so I'm trying to figure out who I am and trying to make that, because it is a big part of me, but it's a different, God, I'm just stumbling over my words now because I haven't really thought about it too much.
It's good. I think it's good to recognize, and I can see you, I can still see the wheels turning in your head, and I can see that you're emotional about it because, and I'm happy for you to share as much as you want, but I think it's hard. And I didn't want this to go this way where we're just bitching back about how hard our amazing jobs are and our careers are, because there's so many good things here. But it is so difficult to give so much of ourselves. And every time, for me, this is my feeling, and I'm assuming you feel the same, and correct me if I'm wrong. Every time you press publish, every time you put a podcast out, every time there's an interview, you're giving something of yourself out into the world. And not a lot of time you get that back. Like, you don't always get as much back as you give out. And I think it's a challenge, and I totally feel the same way as you do. It's like the things that are meaningful to us, the running, the exercise, getting on your bike, like is 12th on my list now, and it feels horrible to admit it on my side. So I totally get it. I totally understand where you are, and I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think you nailed it when you said that I don't want this to be a woe is me. It's it just is what it is. I've dedicated nearly 10 years of my life to trying to do this. And I'm not driven by money. It's not a factor for me. It probably should be a little bit more, especially with raising a small human. I need to maybe make that a priority. But this whole thing has been run on passion and drive. And that takes a lot of giving yourself out there. And yeah, sometimes when you don't get it back, or there's a negative comment, or like that chips away. Not that we get a whole bunch of negative comments. I think it's more if, someone isn't receptive to what we're doing, it feels like, it's another time that I have to work harder, that, I don't have that energy, or it's I don't know, like I said, the first probably 6 years of doing this, none of that, it obviously did affect me, but I just didn't let it. Because I avoided it and just kept going, but then ended up in a massive hole because of it. Yeah. So now it's just trying to, and people throw around the word balance, and I get it, but I don't think there is a actual balance. I like to look at it as a juggle, because you're just constantly changing like your priorities, and whether it be in the workspace, personal, health. But I mean, health should really be number one, because without that, nothing else works. But it's so hard to switch out of that. Yeah. Got to get this done, and
it is so hard. And like anyone who has a business, or anyone who is passionate and about what they do, probably feels like this. They can't let the thought go. You can't go to bed with something in your head. And as you said, we've got 2 adults here working full time with 2 kids, and like every minute counts. And you emailed me the other night saying, I didn't want to text you because I thought you'd be in bed, and it's like midnight here, and I'm like, I'm just chipping away because every minute counts. But I can recognize in myself that, like, man, I'm 16 days into May here, streaming today, and I'm like, when's the 31st? It must surely be around the corner. But and I'm so grateful that I can do this. Like, this is what I get to do for my life. So juggling, balance, I think we've covered it.
Yeah, you must be exhausted.
No, I'm good. I'm tired, but I'm also like, to your point, it's not woe is me. Like, this is a choice. Everything we get to do.
Totally.
So I never want to complain about the choices that I make. But I also want to be a great husband, and I want to be a great dad, and I want to mow my lawn, and I want to go running, and I want to cook dinner and have dinner. Like, so there's a lot of things, and I want to be good at all of them. Which means that I have to spend time working at night when everyone's in bed and things like that. So yes, but it's a choice.
Yes. And it's not complaining, it's discussion. And I think it's important discussions to have, because particularly in our kind of sport, or our kind of work in these sports, is you can feel really lonely, even though you're talking to some of the most incredible people on the planet. They don't, and the audience don't see you working at midnight or doing that chat, but then spending an hour editing, and, or they don't see all that kind of stuff. So it looks like you're living the dream, but there's a lot of what goes on behind the scenes, and that's okay. That's certainly not a complaint, but I think that can get quite lonely, particularly when you're doing, I was having a discussion with someone else in the triathlon media the other day, and we were both sort of saying you do feel alone, particularly because it's spread out across the globe. But someone on the other side of the world is potentially just doing the same thing as you're doing, thinking the same things that you're thinking. And I think in our sport, we we tend to, I've noticed that, and this comes from the top down, we hold on to our own things instead of sharing and talking to other media outlets. And, I think that's why you and I want to connect a lot more, because there's ways that we can work together potentially. And, because it's hard by yourself.
Yeah, totally. We should, of course, I think we should collaborate. I think I'd love to help share more women in triathlon stories and spread the word farther and further and wider on that front. But I also think like maybe there's a support group we need to start, like you and some other peeps. Like let's just get around the table and share ideas and check in on each other, because I think it's important.
Yeah, definitely.
Final question on that, and I want this to be positive. I think that you've done an incredible job. You've provided an incredible outlet. You're an incredible voice for women in triathlon, and I know that people love what you do. If that's of any value, Kate put a little message here. She talked about the Jodie Stimson podcast, one of the best interviews that she's seen, empathetic and sincere of how it was handled. And that's a perfect. This is a perfect example, because people generally don't let you know how much it's impacted them. You put something out in the world, it's good work, it's going to resonate with people, and then it's crickets, and you're like, I know my mum listened, but is anyone else listening? But so I think for anyone out there, if you do find value in any of the work that Steph does, or the work that I do, or any other outlet, or someone who's creative and they've put a work out into the world that you've enjoyed,
tell us,
let us know, good, bad, and ugly, because the feedback is the thing that drives me, and hearing that people, the stuff resonates with people is what keeps me going. So
same.
Just share, just give us a thumbs up and say good job or bad job or whatever. Tell us something.
Totally. And when people send me a private message and I respond, they're a little bit taken aback that I've responded, but I'm like, no, you've given me life today. Thank you. Just that message is incredible. And it's something that I try and do all the time. It's something I learned from my granddad, who, he's just the sweetest man. And I remember just going to cafes, and he would go up to the waitress or the waiter and, take them by the hand and say, thank you so much. You were fantastic today. It was a pleasure to meet you. And I remember watching him doing that, thinking he's a little bit loopy, but also just thinking, they walked away with a smile. That's so nice. He's made their day. And I think that is just so important.
Yeah. People just want to be seen. I can't believe it's almost 45 minutes. This has been a great chat. We're going to have many more, I feel.
Yes.
I've got 3 questions I want to throw your way.
Okay.
The first one, and I've asked these pretty much every day, so get limber, get ready.
Yeah.
Number 1, what's one thing that's changed during this isolation period that you would like to keep once we move on to whatever our next phase of life is?
The extra thoughtfulness. So, for example, it was my birthday during isolation, one of my good mates' birthdays during isolation, and it wasn't about buying big presents or anything. It was about really honing in on what was important, and celebrating birthdays because of the important things, not the big flamboyant things. And I think that's something that we can all work on. Moving forward.
Yeah, perspective. That's great. What did you do for him or her? I made this. So she's got 2 kids, and prior to isolation, her husband had a knee reco and an ankle reco. So she was pretty much in isolation for about 4 weeks before we were put into isolation. So she was just going a little bit stir crazy. Right. So I said, right, we're going for a walk at a socially acceptable distance. And I made some gin and tonics in some nice glass bottles. And then I got a massive sign, and it's in the car, otherwise I would have shown you, and it just said, honk, it's her birthday. And we just walked around the street, and I held the sign up, and people honked for her. And
walked around the streets with people like yelling out the window, which made their day as well, I assume. Yeah, and then I organised a surprise visit in someone's driveway where we had sangria as well. So, I mean, alcohol's important, right?
Just it sounds like creative ways to drink. That's what
Yeah.
Second question. What's one thing you thought was important before isolation that you're happy to leave in the past?
Oh, being hung up on a couple of things. I don't want to say with who, but I've just they really used to upset me, but now I've just kind of seen this as a bit of a restart, and hoping that those kind of things those relationships can be mended a little bit, or not even mended, just not an issue. It just, whatever, move on.
Yep. Good. Yeah, good one. There's a lot more important stuff to worry about, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Number 3, what's been the most memorable moment of joy you've had during isolation?
My birthday was actually pretty good, but I think the best one was, and we got some really cool photos of it. Our mates who lived just a few k up the road, they drove past with their kids. This is the one, it was her birthday. This is the same family.
Yeah.
And they banged on our window. We live on quite a busy street, and we've got this big window that I always have open up so Frankie can see the trams coming past. And they were banging on the window, and Frankie went crazy trying to figure out how to get to them. So we lifted her up on the windowsill, and she's like kissing the window and kissing the kids through the window. And it was and the photos are so good. I'll actually print those photos out because, who prints photos these days? Have to make sure I print them out. But I'll just never forget that. She was like running backwards and forwards in the room trying to figure out how to get to them. And it was just, I loved it. It was so cool.
That's awesome. Kids are
They are. Yep.
You're awesome. I really appreciate you getting up at the ass crack of dawn to come and chat with me. It's really special that you did that. I really appreciate it. And I'm here for you, and let's collaborate. Let's find a way to share more stories and support each other and grow. And for anyone out there who loves Stef's work, I know there's a lot of you. Give her a thumbs up and keep her going. Thanks, Trav. Thank you so much for having me. I looked at the list of other people in your May editions, and some pretty impressive people. So I'm really quite honoured and blown away. Thank you. You're right in there with them. So you're in the A team. You're in the A list. You're awesome. I really appreciate it, Stef, and we'll let's do it again soon. Thanks, dude. Okay, mate. Good job.